You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we discuss all things related to vertebrate pest management from a technical research-based point of view. Well, glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. As I said before, I was recording several podcasts well in advance, and good thing I did. Things have been, I'm still fairly busy in some issues, both in my personal life and my non-wildlife control related work, but also so it was good for me to kind of get some breathing room for some other things that came along. And I hope that you all out there, as you're getting ready for the fall here, your rodent control work is probably growing at this point. Maybe you're having a little bit of breather too, because we're getting closer and closer, of course, to the holidays. Halloween, I guess, now is like the second or third most popular holiday now in the country. So certainly your people are probably going to be gearing up for that as well. So here's my website, of course, and you can purchase books and additional training materials to help you in your wildlife control endeavors. Definitely check that out. Also have things for sale on other book outlets as well. And I have some equipment. If you are interested in being on the show, definitely visit my podcast on being on the show. And then if you're still interested, we'd love to have you. We welcome guests, because we think there's a lot of material out there that needs to be discussed, and new products coming in, and I can't follow everything, and we'd love to help get your information out there as well. I had the pleasure of being on a podcast. Normally I'm the host of a podcast, but I had the privilege of being on a podcast, the Beauty and Beasties, out of the United Kingdom. So it's a pest control podcast where I was able to be guest there, and you can look that up. Beauties and Beasties. It's a podcast in the UK. We did it live, which was, of course, kind of neat. So I took some time off from work to take care of that. Appreciated them having. Want to give them a little shout out there for having me there. They were very kind and gracious. We didn't talk a lot about pest control, unfortunately. But, they got into the questions of me being a theologian, and we talked about, of course, the animal rights protest industry, and I gave them my perspective on that. Those of you who don't know me, I did my dissertation on the Christian version, and I use that word in quotes because I don't believe they're Christian, certainly not Orthodox Christian, I guess. And so they're people who claim to follow Christ and yet support animal rights or a hyper animal protection agenda, and I categorically reject that, as well as I argue that Scripture does. But of course, a lot of people claim to be Christians who I don't know what Bible they're reading, but they're certainly reading a different one than what I have studied, to be sure. But anyways, if you want to check that out and listen to some of my perspectives on that, you can definitely hear that there. So many thanks for them and their kindness in having me there. Hope maybe they'll have me back, and we'll delve down into some of the technical issues, because I think there's a lot of neat stuff going on in the UK, and I certainly want to explore that more, because I do think there's a lot we can learn from the United Kingdom and the way they do pest control. Their issues are somewhat different than what we have here in the United States, but that they have different tools that they use and different approaches, and I think we can benefit from their experience. And so I hope that we have greater communication. And they told me in no uncertain terms that they were working on that. That was part of the reason why they were reaching out to people in the wildlife control, vertebrate pest control arena, so that we can share ideas back and forth with each other to improve the entire industry. And kudos for them to wanting to do that, because we can always improve our work in wildlife control, and of course they're broader than wildlife control, but pest control in general, we can always strive to do better and better, to do more targeted services, to use pesticides in the best possible manner, and for the protection of the environment and our clients, and the management of and the protection of non-target species as well. So yeah, definitely you might want to check them out. Beauties and Beasties. I'll get that right eventually. Kudos to them for having me. All right, enough about me at this particular point. Let me bring up my PowerPoint, and for this week wanted to talk a little bit about roof rats. Now, we don't have a lot of roof rats in the United States compared to Norway rats, but nevertheless, they are a big issue where they do occur. And let me try to get this presentation up. There we go. All right, now talking about roof rats. Now, if you're not familiar with roof rats, of course, you can see the scientific name there, Rattus rattus. Their tail, as you can tell from this beautiful picture by Hazel H. from Wikimedia Commons, is longer than the length of their body. Now, if you're not familiar with that, the length of a body of an animal is measured from the tip of the nose to the base of the tail. That's the total, what's called the total body, the body length. And then if you have the total length, that's measured from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. Now, you'd want to be sure you're getting the bony part of the nail. You can't count the fur, right? So it has to be, you have to pinch it, get to them, and make sure the animal is either anesthetized or fully dead. It might turn around and bite you, right? So you want to be careful. But the reason for this is because it helps to give a quick and dirty way of distinguishing a Norway rat or a brown rat from a roof rat, also known as a black rat. And so the black rat, you can take its tail and bend it over its back and touch the tip of its nose. You can't do that with a Norway, also known as a brown rat. Their tails are shorter than the length of their body. Roof rat, tail longer than the length of their body. Brown rat, tail shorter than the length of their body. So it's very quick and easy. And there's also another technique that people use. They take their ear and bend it over the eye. But the one I think is really convenient is grab the tail, bend it over. If you can touch the nose, it's going to be a roof rat. If we're talking here, of course, United States. Once you start getting out into the Pacific area, you have to deal with Polynesian rats, and things get a little bit more complicated. So we're talking here in the United States, something quick, dirty, and so this is something for you to tell roof rats. Now, there is a debate, just so that you're aware of. I don't want people emailing me and yelling at me, you didn't talk about this. There is a debate whether some of those rats in Southern California are all true roof rats, right? Rattus rattus, and it could be something else. But that starts... I'm not a biologist. I don't claim to be a biologist, but my point is that sometimes I get a little frustrated that terms... I'm interested in species issues when it has practical import, rather than if you're having to do a genetic test in order to determine what this animal is. I really question whether that is a useful guide, because ultimately we're interested in, is there a behavior difference that genetics is manifested, but I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with that. But for our purposes, grab the tail, bend it over, touch the nose. If it does, then you're dealing with roof rat. If you can't reach, it's going to be a Norway rat or a brown rat. Same animal, different name, right? Black rat and roof rat are the same. Brown rat, Norway rat are the same. All right. So we're going to talk about baits. Now, the beauty with baits, of course, if you're in the vertebrate pest space, it's like alchemy for us. Now, if you recall what alchemy was all about, alchemy was the attempt to find a way to transform what's called base metals like lead and convert it into gold, right? And so it became this sort of quest for the Holy Grail. Well, that's what baits are to vertebrate pest specialists, right? We love baits. We're looking for that magic bait that just makes an animal run into the trap, right? That's what we want. Now, it doesn't exist, right? There are certainly some baits that are going to be better than others, but nevertheless, it becomes kind of a cult. So if you're wondering why there are so many different baits on the market, that's part of it, right? Everyone has their own little witch. And the reality is that different animals are going to eat, the same species of animal can have different dietary preferences in different parts of the country. Because there is evidence to suggest with rodents is that they learn what their mother eats in utero, right? While they're not even born yet. And of course, they're always going to be sharing in the foods that their mother was eating, right? And so it makes sense that if a rat has been raised on, let's say, grain, well, then don't be shocked if it likes grain, right? It's the same way when you teach a child to like broccoli, they're going to like broccoli, right? And so this is where our upbringing can impact what our preferences are. Well, animals are no different than us in that regard, right? So we like certain foods because we were raised with foods. Rodents like certain foods because they were raised with certain foods, right? But nevertheless, so how do we find some of those baits that the research shows are more effective than others? And that takes time, and this is where we can rely on the researchers to give us ideas and clues to help us choose wisely, because wildlife control is so hard as it is. We need every advantage that we can get. Okay, and certainly baits are going to be part of that. All right, so here's the publication. The publication title was called Assessing the Attractiveness of 3 Baits for Roof Rats in a California Citrus Orchards. Let me repeat that again for you. So it's Assessing the Attractiveness of 3 Baits for Roof Rats in California Citrus Orchards. Now, that tells you a lot because they're trying to bait in an area where the rats have plenty of alternative food available, right? It's always going to be easier to trap rats when they're stressed for food. That's why the first step in IPM is if you can modify the habitat, then you can put stress. It actually acts as a multiplier and makes other techniques more effective. Because why would a rat go after your bait if there's plenty of alternative food available, right? So this is a hard test in this regard. And the researchers who were involved in it is Callista N. Wales like country of Wales, Ryan Meinertz, and Roger A. Baldwin. Now, I know Roger A. Baldwin. He is a professor, sort of an extension professor over at the University of California. A great guy. Has done a lot of work in the area of vertebrate pest management. So anything written by him is something you want to be paying attention because he does applied science, right? And so not to bash people that are doing theoretical stuff. That's not the point. But the point is that for our purposes, he is someone who is doing solid research that has real world practical implications for people like you who are doing field work and trying to control pests for your clients or even for yourself for that matter, right? So I'm sure we have some viewers who aren't necessarily professionals. All right, so that was published in the Journal Agronomy 2021, volume 11, and the article number is 2417. You can see the DOI there. But if you just do a Google search on Baldwin, this should come up. Just say Baldwin, roof rats, 3 baits. You can see the abstract there. So the information I'm providing comes from this particular article. So I'm kind of giving you a synthesis, a synopsis, boiling it down for you, giving you the information so you can then decide how you want to use that for yourself. Okay, so what was their goal? Well, they wanted to find out if there would be a bait that would be the best for monitoring stations, because one of the issues that farmers, of course, are going to have, these orchard growers, is that you want to find tipping points. You want to find when are the rat populations getting high enough to initiate control. You can say, well, control them all the time. It's not always practical. It's not always cost effective. So there are, and the point is that, farmers understand that they lose a little bit to pests in their crop. So you have to find that place where the cost of control is justified by the results, right? Because you don't want to throw more good money after bad, right? So that's kind of what they're looking for. They're looking for a bait that would encourage rats to enter these monitoring stations so they could get counts, and that's what they were evaluating here. And so they did the testing in these citrus groves in the months between January and April inclusive, right? And so they from January to April. Now they were careful to point out that there was never that these orchards in California, it's hard for me to imagine because in Montana we have a real winter, right? But in California, they're growing crops year round, right? So there's never a time when their orchard doesn't have produce, okay, or fruit. I probably should say with orchards, right? There's never a time when it's just simply fallow, where there's nothing there. There's always some food there. That's hard for me to wrap my head around. But think about farming 365 days a year. That's basically what they're doing. So it's important to realize that. So when they're doing this test, you say, they're doing it in the wintertime. It didn't matter. There was still food around for these rats to eat. Okay, very important for you to recognize that. And so here was their study design. Sorry for the ugly slide here, right? So basically, they picked a study plot of 385 meters by 385 meters. Now, you recall a meter is a little longer than a yard. It's 39 inches and change versus our 36 inches. So it's a pretty big area, and they chose 6 of these sites that were 385 meters squared. Okay, 3 were chosen in lemon groves. 2 were chosen in orange groves, and 1 orchard was mixed with oranges and lemons. Okay, so a pretty good test. Now, roof rats like fruit, right? So they're into fruit, so it's not a problem. There's plenty of food for these roof rats. And so what they did was they took some plastic tracking tunnels. Now, this is something that researchers do. So it's basically this box that would be 60 centimeters long. Now, it takes 2.5 centimeters to make an inch, right? So you're looking at something like 15 inches long by 7 inches, by probably 5 inches by 4 inches, right? And, 2.5, about 4 inches. So these little square boxes were placed in this site, which again is 385 meters by 385 meters. And it took these tubes and placed them in a 10 by 10 grid. So there would be 100 of these tunnels in every plot that they were testing. And each tube was placed 35 meters from all the others. And then what they would do is they would randomly place or intermittently place different baits inside of the tunnels. And then every 4th one, there would be no bait placed at all. That would be called the control. So how much did the tube itself act as an attractant to roof rats? And all the stations were left in the area for 3 days. Okay. And so here's how it was done. So here we have our 10 by 10 grid. So there's 100 of these tubes in each one of these plots that are 385 meters squared. So the crosses, that look like a star, is the no-tox wax block. The triangle is the control. In other words, there's no bait in it. The X with a circle around it was peanut butter. And then the plus, like the red cross there, looks like a little cross there, that was the rat and mouse attractant. That's a soft bait. Okay, so you can see it's just each, boom, 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 boom. There you go, right? That's kind of how they randomized it, right? So this row up here had alternating rat and mouse. This one here has no tox block with control, and they just simply went down the list here and kind of randomized the whole thing. Okay, pretty straightforward. And each one of these is 35 meters apart. So about 40 feet. Oh, excuse me, no. About 130, probably about 130 feet or so apart from each other. So we're dealing with some pretty large acreages here. Here are the results. This is what we're interested in, right? The control had about 45% of the tubes visited by roof rats. Now, they did get more visitations with peanut butter, soft bait, and wax block. But the bottom line is that there was no statistical difference between any of them. Now, you may say, but there was a difference, Stephen. Peanut butter did better than the control. The control, of course, was no bait. Well, that's true. The problem when they talk about the word statistical difference, what their meaning is that there wasn't enough of a difference to overcome the issue of pure randomness. So when they're using statistical analysis, they're trying to say, what are the odds that the difference between these two results are on the basis of pure randomness? Now, that may be hard for us to wrap our head around, right? But to take for a moment, you say, well, what are the odds of you flipping a coin and getting heads, right? Let's say you take a U.S. quarter and you flip it in the air. What are the odds you're going to get heads again? And you're going to say 50%. It's 1 out of 2. And that answer is correct. But what happens if you flip it 3 times and you get heads 3 times in a row? Is that because the coin is loaded? In other words, it's weighted in such a way to make it more likely to come up heads? Or is that just pure randomness? And the reality is, if you do this enough, you'll have these streaks where you'll get heads, 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 and then it will flip back to tails again. Well, that's what statistics tries to say. So what's the probability that the difference between peanut butter and the control, or soft bait and control, is simply a result of the randomness of life? Just someone rolled the dice and it came up 6s multiple times, right? Well, that's what they found here. That's when they said there's not enough difference to justify that we can't explain by just pure randomness. In other words, during this 3-day study, they found that the rats were just as likely to go into the peanut butter tube as they were the control tube. Now, if they'd expanded this out and maybe left the tubes out there for a month, maybe there would be a difference, right? But then you'd have the problem of the rats realizing which ones had food in it and maybe just visiting again and again and again to get the food. Now, that would be great if you're trapping, right? But they weren't trapping with this. So this is purely a monitoring exercise. And that's basically what we found. So what do we do with this information? It's not meaningless. It just means that choose the bait that works best for you. And so you say, well, why wouldn't I just use nothing? Well, you could. Right? But chances are, just because something can't always be statistically proven, your experience may be able to say, what, having a bait in there gives me just a little bit of an edge. It may help your confidence, right? But nevertheless, choose a bait that you're comfortable with. In other words, not all baits are equal in the sense of their ultimate purpose. The wax blocks, they're going to hold up well in bad weather. So if you're in an area where it rains a lot and you're needing to control roof rats, that wax blocks would be a good choice, right? Soft bait, just having that bait out of the container can save you time, right? So rather than having to scoop out stuff out of a peanut butter container. But also peanut butter works too. It's readily available. Now, I do want to give you a caution. Do not just open up a jar of peanut butter at your client's location, right? It's so offensive to a client. You may say, well, I don't want to lie to them. You're not lying to them. Don't tell them you're not using peanut butter, right? If you're going to use peanut butter, but at least have the courtesy to color it, mix it up with something, maybe throw some oats in it, whatever the case may be. The reason is how would you feel, and this is the analogy I use, how would you feel if your computer went on the fritz, right? You call the computer guy over to your house, he does house visits, he's checking out your computer, and all of a sudden what he does is he goes down, he plugs it in, and then charges you $85 for the visit. Now, how would you feel about that? You say, well, he's being honest. Yes, he's being honest, but how do you feel? He fixed your computer. He plugged it in, right? And you're like, all right, why am I paying $85 to fix my computer? Well, the same way, when you just pull out a jar of peanut butter, it devalues what you do. And that's one reason why it helps to use a professional bait. Just so that the client's not saying, well, that's something I could do. Yes, they could have simply taken the peanut butter and put it on a trap themselves. Absolutely, they could have. But they didn't, right? So, not saying that peanut butter is a bad bait. It's not. It's a wonderful bait. It captures a lot of animals, right? The sugar and fat just seem to work. But nevertheless, try not to insult your clients, right? Use some food coloring, add some other materials into it that make it look different than someone you're pulling out your Skippy jar, right? Whatever the case may be. And then lastly, don't forget that a blind set, now if you're not familiar with different trapping methods, there are 3 different kinds of trap sets, right? You have what's called a baited set, that is you have your trap and you're luring the animal into the trap by the use of some sort of food or lure. A blind set is where you're simply placing the trap along a travel route that an animal uses and he just encounters it on the basis of his normal moving activities. That's called a blind set. Because he doesn't know it's there in a sense, right? He's just cruising along and he encounters the trap. That's what these tubes are for. That's a blind set if there's no bait in it. And then lastly, you have what's called a positive set, and that is where you're placing a trap directly over an opening where one end of the trap is closed and the only thing that can be caught is coming out of the hole. Because if you had a 2-door trap over that, that would be a blind set because the animal's coming out of the hole and thinks it can leave the hole. A positive set is the cage is blocked at one end, and the only thing that can be caught is from coming out of the hole. That's called a positive set because you're positively capturing the guilty animal. Okay, so don't forget, blind sets work well, and this is something I think more people in the rodent control world we need to work on because it's beautiful in the sense there's no bait to go stale, there's no bait to capture to lure a non-target animal. It's simply relying on that particular trail to capture it. And plus, it's hard for an animal to get wise to it, right? If they're placed well. So I hope that was helpful for you. Again, let me get to the research again for you if you're interested. And it's assessing the attractiveness of 3 baits for roof rats in California citrus orchards. And it was published by in Agronomy in 2021, Volume 11, Article 2417. So nevertheless, something for you to think about. And it just tells you that choose what you like, right, for your bait, right? All of them were attractive to rats that had plenty of alternative food. How that research would differ if there wasn't available food, that's a good question, but that's also another research publication that would be different, right? So anyways, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. I run Wildlife Control Consultant. Thanks for paying attention to the show and listening along. I hope you found this helpful. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows, perhaps you'd like to be on the show, you can reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love getting ideas from the public because otherwise I'm just going to talk about what I'm interested in. So until next time, take care, everyone.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast.
Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.